Okay, this is the first video on the kingdom Animalia, and that falls in the domain Euchara. So if you remember, when we studied classification, we studied two different domains that include the prokaryotes, or the bacteria, and then there were four kingdoms within the domain Euchara. So we're in the domain Euchara, so the kingdoms are Protista, and remember you did a Protista lab where you looked at them under the microscope. The next group are the fungi. So the kingdom fungi, you did a project on a fungus. We're now studying Animalia, and our next unit will be Plantae. So our focus today will be on the animals. Okay, so some of the characteristics of animals, they are heterotrophs, meaning that they need to eat other organisms to get their nutrients. They are multicellular, and that allows for very complex bodies. They do not have cell walls, which allows them to be active and move. And then finally, they have sexual reproduction, meaning that they have two parents and their offspring are going to be a genetic recombination of the parents. So this is a cladogram of the animal kingdom. Let me get a pointer. So remember our cladograms and how we organize organisms and their relationships. So at the bottom of my cladogram, I have an ancestral protist. This protist down here is not an animal. So this is the organism we think that gave rise to all of the organisms on our cladogram, or all of the animals. So once we cross this line and go up here, we're now into the animal kingdom. So going across the top here, so the most simplistic organism on our tree that branches off first is the porifera, and these are the sponges. The next group are the cnidarians, the C is silent here, and these would be your jellyfish. The next group are the platyhelminthes, and these are flatworms. They have a very flat body. The next group is also a worm-like organism, and they're considered the roundworms because their body is round in shape. The next group on my tree are the mollusca, and these are the mollusks, or the shelled organisms, or organisms that ancestors had a shell. The annelids, and these are segmented worms like earthworms. The next group are the arthropods, and these include insects and spiders, and we'll see crustaceans as well. And the next group are the echinoderms, and these are like starfish. They have a spiny outer shell, not a shell, but an outer coating. These are all the inverts. The next group are the vertebrates, and so here are the chordates, or the vertebrates. There are actually some in the chordata that are not vertebrates or don't have a backbone, but we're only going to focus on the vertebrates. Okay, so next I'm going to look at why we have this branching pattern. So the first group, first of all these organisms are multicellular. If you remember looking at the protists under the microscope, those were unicellular. So the kingdom Animalia are all multicellular. So everybody on here is multicellular. The next branch is going to eliminate these guys. So when we have tissues, sponges lack tissues, meaning that they do not have cells working together to have a common purpose. They do have cells that are specialized, but they don't have groups of cells working together to do a specific job. So they lack tissues. The next division is bilateral symmetry. So the sponges actually have no symmetry, and the jellyfish have what we call radial symmetry. Or if I draw a line through the organism and I cross the midpoint, any place I draw that line, I will have two equal halves. So this is considered radial symmetry. Bilateral symmetry it means that I can only draw one line through the organism and have two equal halves. So if I were to take this organism and cut it this way, I would have the tail end and the head end. That would not be two equal halves. If I were to cut it sort of down the middle this way, so I have the back and the front, that would not give me two equal halves. However, if I cut it on this line that we have here, I have two equal halves. What this does for the organism is it allows for a head region. So if you look at this radial symmetry, there's no head, which means that the organism doesn't have an area that it can kind of stick out into the environment and inspect the environment before the whole organism goes into that environment. So if we notice the head has the brain, it has all these sense organs. So this organism could like peer out and look before it entered its environment, and that's an advantage. Okay, so that's bilateral symmetry. The next group is body cavity, and the flatworms lack a body cavity. Everybody else on here has a body cavity. So what we're going to see when we get to these organisms, that they're going to have much more complex body systems because they have space for these body systems to develop. So we're going to start to see digestive systems and respiratory systems and circulatory systems and reproductive systems in these organisms. So we're going to see a greater level of complexity. Okay, everybody after this is segmented, and even we're segmented. But if you think about like an earthworm, obviously there's lots of segments, and arthropod has those joints and whatnot. So here we see segmentation. And over on this branch, we see an exoskeleton, or a skeleton on the outside of the organism. And over here we have an endoskeleton. So these are organisms that have a skeleton on the inside of the organism. So obviously in us, the vertebrates, our bones are our endoskeleton, and I'll show you in class the endoskeleton of a starfish. They actually have an endoskeleton as well. So this is the tree of the animals. The next lecture is going to go through the characteristics of first the 8 invertebrate phyla that you need to know. The phyla are across the top here. And then finally the last will be on the vertebrates, which is the last phyla that you need to know. I hope this helped.